Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone wherever you are in the world. Welcome to our webinar on how to develop practical skills to support teaching and learning Cambridge IGCSE ICT with Evans Chikasa. I'm Jasmine Short and I'll be hosting the webinar with Evans today. We're both hosting the webinar remotely, so if we have any internet issues, please do bear with us. We'll be back online shortly if anything does go wrong. You may notice that your camera and microphones are switched off. They will stay this way throughout the webinar to avoid any background noise. Instead, we ask that you communicate through the chat box or the QA box. You can find these by wiggling your mouse at the top or bottom of your screen to bring up the navigation bar. We'd love to hear from you in the chat box, so please feel free to say hello and tell us where you're from. The chat box is also an area to ask any technical questions about the webinar. My colleague Tamsin and I will be looking through the chat and will try to help you with any technical issues you might have. Evans will be doing a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. Excuse me. If you think of any questions for him, please pop these in the Q&A box and we'll try to answer as many as possible at the end of the webinar. After the Q&A, there will be a short survey. The survey takes just a few minutes to complete and we're very grateful if you could spare a moment of your time to answer a few questions for us. I'm sure you're all very used to online videos after this past year, but if you have any issues with audio, I suggest using headphones and checking your audio settings in your system preferences. Likewise, if you have any trouble seeing the video, I suggest everyone's favourite fix, turning it off and on again. Try leaving the webinar and rejoining. Hopefully, this will fix any issues you might have. If not, please don't worry. We'll be recording the webinar today and we'll be uploading this to our YouTube channel for you to take a look back on or to share with a colleague. We hope to email this out to you later this week. We won't be providing certificates for this webinar, but you can use this email as evidence of your attendance. Okay, it looks like we have lots of people online today, so I will now pass over to Evans to begin the webinar.
All right, thank you so much, Jasmine, for that wonderful introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to every one of you. I hope we're all doing well. Thank you so much for taking time to join this webinar. I hope you find it very informative by the time we're done. So today we will be looking at how to develop practical skills to support teaching and learning for the Cambridge IGCSE ICT. So a little bit about myself before we go into details. As you may know, my name is Evans Chikasa. I'm the subject leader for computer science and ICT at an international school in China, and I'm also an author at Cambridge University Press, the current author for the new edition of the Cambridge IGCSE ICT Practical Skills Workbook, which I'll be talking about in some slides ahead of us. I'm also a management information system school trainer. I've been a timetabler, child protection coordinator, and probably most of you know me from my YouTube work. I run an education channel on YouTube where I solve ICT, IT, and computer science past papers. All right, so let's go into what we are going to be looking at today. We will cover the structure of the practical papers, and then we will look at some tools that you need to set up in your computer rooms. We'll look at both the hardware and the software, and then we'll look at the resources that are available to support your practical sessions. You have the textbooks as well as the digital sites. And then finally, we'll look at the strategies that you can use to develop practical skills. At the end of this webinar, like Jasmine put it, we'll have a question and answer session. All right. So let's go quickly into the chapters that make up the structure for the practical papers. As you may be aware by this time that ICT has got 21 chapters from the syllabus, and 11 of those chapters are practical chapters and 10 of those chapters are theory chapters. So you have from chapter 11 to chapter 21, these are practical chapters. From the course book, then from the workbook, you are from chapter 1 to chapter 11. So I have broken down these chapters based on the paper that they belong to. So for example, you have paper 2 and paper 3, which are the practical papers that we'll be looking at for the practical sessions. You have the document production, the databases, as well as the presentation chapters making up paper 2. These are the main chapters. They're not the only chapters that you have in paper 2, but they're basically the main chapters. Then also for paper 3, you have spreadsheets, website authoring. And then the other chapters that I've put in the last column here, they are 6 chapters that will appear or that may appear in both papers or in either of the papers that you have. Okay, so you have layouts, images, file management, graphs and charts, proofing and styles. So for example, if you're working on a document production section, students might be asked to probably arrange objects in a certain way, or they may be working on images, manipulating images, inserting images, or they may be storing files, folders, creating, copying and pasting and stuff like that. Or if they're working in spreadsheets, you might find maybe they may be creating graphs, or if they're working web authoring, they may be creating styles. And also you see that the chapters that I've listed on the right-hand side actually do appear in both papers, but the main chapters are the ones that I've put in under the columns for paper 2 and paper 3. So now we can look at the tools that you will need to have in your computer room for you to be able to run the practical sessions with the students. The most important tool, of course, set of computers that you need. At least each student should have access to a computer for them to complete the practical work. And I might stress here that computers, we need to keep up with the changes in technology. This means that we need also to be updating our computers regularly, at least to make sure that our computers are competent enough to handle the practical skills that are being required of the students. So this means that as schools, heads of departments or deputy heads or whoever is in charge of handling the ICT infrastructure in school should be ensuring that the computers are capable of handling whatever students are required of managing. And this also means that regularly updating our computers to make sure that they are not freezing during practical sessions, making sure that students have the best platform for them to execute their work. Alongside computers, you might need to have headphones. These are very critical if students will be dealing with audio and video files. For example, in chapters like website authoring, you can also have maybe in a presentation, they may be required to edit or insert or use a video, which might require them to use headphones. So these are basic hardware requirements. They're not the only hardware requirements or hardwares that you can use in the computer room, but they're just the basic to get you started, or they can help you run a practical session without any issue. But if you feel like you want to introduce anything that will enhance your teaching and learning in class, please feel free to do that. You can add things like iPads and stuff like that. Okay. In terms of software, I will talk about the software as I have used it in the practical skills workbook. So there are many other software items that I'll mention this shortly, but in the practical skills workbook, I have used these software. I've used Microsoft Access for paper 2, Word for paper 2, and PowerPoint for paper 2. And activities that have to do with paper 3, I've used Excel, I've used Adobe Dreamweaver, and I've used Photoshop. So I must be quick to point out here that these are not the only software packages that you can use for completing practical tasks. You can also use other software. So there'll probably be a link in the chat box, a link to my YouTube channel where you can get alternative software. I've put up a video on my YouTube channel where I've explained some other software that you can use to complete the practical tasks, okay? And I've also indicated also some good review of certain software, why you can use a particular software and why you should not use a particular software to complete the task, especially for the new syllabus. Our concern mainly is for the new syllabus because there has been some changes around, so we should be cautious as well when we choose software to support the practical sessions. So some of the things that you can consider when you're choosing a suitable software for your computer room for the students to be using. The most important thing that you should be looking out for is the syllabus expectation. I think this cannot be overemphasized. This is the core of any practical session that you'll be conducting. You need to make sure that the software that you are installing in the lab meets the expectations outlined in the syllabus. It's pointless to have a software which does not complete the, allow the students to complete the different activities that the questions is asking them. So in this case, you need to look out for the syllabus. Cambridge usually releases a syllabus maybe 2 years or a year before the exam date. So if you go on the school hub, you can find a list of syllabuses depending for the session that you'll be looking at. We already have the 2023 to 2025 syllabus, so that informs your planning as far as what to expect from the students concerned. So this also gives you an opportunity to start preparing, thinking about what software will be able to complete those activities. I must mention here that it's not every software that is going to allow you to complete the activities expected from the students. I'll give you an example. For example, if you thinking about website authoring, in the year 2012, 2013, we were using HTML3, HTML4, but today we are using HTML5. So if you're using certain software which still have the framework as HTML3 and HTML4, you'll find that when it comes to video editing, you will struggle to teach that concept because HTML3 and HTML4 does not support embedding of videos. So this is why I say you need to be up to date. You need to be regularly updating your software and all. So the other thing that you need to do is you need to consider the support that that software receives from the developers. I just gave an example of certain software not meeting syllabus expectation. For example, some software were created around 2003, and this is 2021. So you can imagine from 2003 to 2021, that's almost 18 years. And some developers have stopped even supporting those software. So what's important is for you when you're trying to install a software, try to bring the software into the computer room, you look at the support it receives from the people who developed that software or from the community. Okay, does it regularly receives updates? If it doesn't, chances are very high that you might be running, let's say, software for HTML editing, which is running with HTML3 instead of running a software which is running HTML5. Okay. And then the last thing that you may need to consider when you're running your hardware, when you're selecting your software, is having hardware requirements that will support that software. Of course, this is a big issue, again, in some schools where they're still running on old computers, but the teachers want to install new software on the old computer platforms. Again, this is going to be an issue. You find computers will be freezing, they will not be executing the work as they're supposed to. So it's important that you look at the hardware specification for your machines, as well as the requirements from the computer end, the software end. And then you can compare and find out which one, again, is going to be compatible for that. Okay. All right, so the next thing I'll talk about the resources that are available for us to use to complete our practical sessions. Of course, we have the 3 books that have been written. You have the course book, you have the skills workbook, and you have the teacher resource book. So I'll briefly talk about the course book and the teacher resource, and then I'll give you more details about the practical skills workbook. This is the book that I have written. Okay, so the course book supports the full range of chapters in the syllabus. So again, that should be exciting for you. It has got a number of features that you can take advantage of as a teacher, as well as students can take advantage of. For example, you've got a 3-tier approach to activities in the textbook. This is where we use the aspect of differentiation, gauging the different tasks according to different levels of difficulty, helping students who are at different levels of ability. So you will find that feature very useful. You stretch the learners with the challenge activities, covering just different aspects. You also have another feature like ICT in context, which links the different chapters that the students will be looking at with the practices that are being carried out in industry. Again, that is something that you will find very useful. Also, you have access to source files as well as the answers. So you can download this for free on the Cambridge Go website. Again, I'll talk about that in a moment. Okay. So in terms of the teacher resource, so the teacher resource supports the course book. Again, it's a resource that is very rich in information materials. You will find it very helpful. So it works through chapter by chapter, pairing or siding with the course book, and you can find other things like worksheets there. You can find ideas about homework. You can find ideas about lesson plans, lesson planning, or start ideas. You can have things like exam style past paper samples. So it's a very rich resource, and I highly recommend that at least in the department we have part of this book as part of our resources. So let me quickly talk about the practical skills workbook, the one that I have written. So the practical skill workbook has got a number of features also that make it very exciting for the students and teachers alike. Each task starts out with the learning intentions, what the students will be covering for that particular task. And then I break down the different tasks into the 3-tier approach that we are talking about, the getting started, the practice, and the challenge. Again, these matching up with the level of difficulty and supporting differentiation for different students at different abilities. And then you have another feature for peer or self-assessment, allowing the students to evaluate their own learning, their own work, or the work of other students. Okay. Other features that you will find are worked examples. Here I show a step-by-step guide on how to approach a particular problem or a particular skill. And you have these examples distributed throughout the workbook. So it's very interesting. And just to mention that we do have a number of new things, new topics that have been brought into the syllabus. So this book will be, or these books will be very useful for us to have to support the changes in the syllabus for the, rather the changes in the new syllabus. So it's very important that we get a hold of these books. Other features include keywords. Okay, so here we have description of certain words, and you have tips guiding the learners on a particular concept. You have reflection, giving the learners an opportunity to think about their learning and ways in which they can improve further. Here we can talk about the sample, maybe activities that would be found in the practical workbook. So I just extracted these from the textbook itself. So a practical activity, of course, will start with the task label. For example, this is practical task 2.2. And then we'll have the learning intentions. So in this case, students were just to crop an image or rotate an image or reflect an image. And then you have the 3-tier approach. So starting with the getting started activity, where students will be given a scenario around which they will be working with the getting started activity. So here we're just testing the basic skills or essential skills that are required for them to be able to complete this particular task. Then from there, we would move on. Before that, maybe you can have a keyword. In this case, a word in orange would have a corresponding keyword defined alongside it. So that's how you'll be identifying some keywords in the textbook. So from the getting started, then you can move to the practice. Again, with the practice, you go a little bit deeper, testing the students understanding of concepts. I like the idea of giving them a scenario around which to work. So you have fictitious business idea, which makes it look as though it's a real world scenario for them as they work through the practical activities. So here in the getting started activity, they're working with a document, Word document. Here they're working with the CSV file. So the level of application differs. They will need to have some skills from spreadsheet as well. Then again, the same concept, cropping images, placing the images or other objects onto the document accurately, resizing the images and all those things would be essential. Then the challenge, which is the last part, would allow the students to be stretched further. So here again, you can continue on the same skill that you are testing or bringing a new skill for the students to work through. Okay. So I'll quickly go to the digital resources that are available. Of course, we as teachers, we go online a lot and we look for material, whatever material we can use in our classroom setup. But it's also important for us to know where we can get some meaningful material that we can use in our classes, or that we can give to link or download resources from and give students as homework and so on. So the first resource I will talk about is the Cambridge Go website. Most of us probably are familiar with the Cambridge Elevate website, so we migrate into the Cambridge Go website. This is where we'll be downloading, or will be more like our library for our books, our resources. We can go ahead and purchase some of those resources and use them. We'll find things like worksheets from there, source file answers. We can download the source files themselves and use them from this same website. Okay, so I'm sure Jasmine probably will give a link so that you can sign up for this or to this website and be able to access some of the content from there. Another one is the Brighter Thinking blog. This is a wonderful blog where teachers and other educators will bring in vast, knowledge on board that we can use, adopt in our classrooms. Some of them might be directly related to teaching. Others might just be about improving our teaching and so on. So you'll find this blog as well very useful. Then you have the Brighter Thinking pod. Again, this is where you can find audio files that you can find meaningful. They may not necessarily be like syllabus related, but you'll find them there like field related. For example, you may find topics like robotics and other topics. So it's very important that you also look out for this web resource. Of course, you have my YouTube channel, and I want to put it here because you'll find some exam related information like working through past papers, also some videos that I've done on certain chapters or certain topics. You'll find also some videos like the one that I just talked about, where I discuss advantages and disadvantages of certain software and which software you can put in the computer room and so on. So you can also use this resource. You'll find it very helpful. So now we're getting closer to the meat for the day. We'll be talking about the strategies that you can use to develop your practical skills. Now, this is a very big issue, not only just for students, but also for teachers, because we are very busy. We spend so much time preparing our work, our classes, marking, and so much that sometimes we don't have the time to focus on developing the practical skills ourselves. But I'll just give you some of the strategies that we can use as teachers, as well as applying them to the students to help develop some practical skills. So the first one I'll talk about is understanding the big picture. Now, this is a very important concept given any practical topic that you can think about, whether it's databases, whether it's website authoring, whether it's spreadsheets or it's document production. The big picture is something that you should always look out for. or students should always look out for. Now, this gives an overview of what that chapter is or what it relates to. You can also think about it like, how is that chapter being applied in real world? How is that chapter being related to the industry? How is it supporting the industry? Are there proper examples in an industry that you can think of that are using the concepts that are coming from that chapter? Now, when students are given this idea, they begin to know exactly where that chapter is going. Because sometimes you may introduce a chapter in class and students have absolutely no idea. The only thing that they know is the very things that you say or you talk about in class. Every time you introduce a lesson, that's the very thing that students know about the chapter that you're talking about. So giving students an overview of the chapter and how it relates in industry, how it is used, get case samples or scenarios, case studies and all, will give students a very good picture of where this chapter is going. And sometimes it will even stir the passion and the interest in that chapter from the students, okay? So that's very, very important for us to do. The second thing is understanding the typical knowledge or syllabus-based knowledge. So having gone that far, thinking about the big picture, or you need to come down now, what does the syllabus expect you to know about that chapter? Now, we are in a technological subject, and technology is so vast and it is advancing at a very rapid pace. So some of the things that are on the market today don't apply to our syllabus. So it's important that we familiarize ourselves with the knowledge that is expected from the syllabus. So we come down now, we've taught the students the big picture, they know how far they can go with that chapter, but then we bring them down. You are expected to learn about this and this and this and that. And that is the syllabus-based knowledge, which is very, very key. So when you're developing your skill, start with the big picture, then narrow down to what is expected. What should you restrict yourself to as you prepare? Then, of course, preparing the practical questions. I might say here that this part has been really, really of help. Or let me put it this way, this part has been answered. It's like a prayer answered for most people, because the pain of every teacher is preparing questions, like preparing activities for students. This is more like a challenge. We don't have so much time to prepare these activities. But this book series that I've talked about, has a vast range of resources that are already available for us to use. So we may not spend so much time anymore preparing practical questions, as these will be available through worksheets. You have the practical skills workbook, so you have a lot of questions and hundreds of source files that students can be working around it. So this is a very positive development as far as practical questions are concerned. But also the other aspect that I wanted to talk about is not only us relying on preparing the questions ourselves as teachers, but also using the students themselves to prepare the different questions. Now, it's very important that we develop and encourage students to be able to do peer assessment. Is a very critical aspect of development in the mind of a student, when they're able to critically analyze a problem, find a solution to the problem on their own. So, for example, what I like to do is break my students into small groups, and then I can give them, for example, come up with 5 questions. So the questions must show different levels of difficulty. So that's encouraging the aspect of differentiation. So when they come up with 5 questions, then they have to come up also with the mark scheme. So they have to solve the questions themselves. If they're practical questions, they have to solve the questions themselves. So let's say in a class setup, you have 4 groups, or you end up having 4 groups after you split the students into groups. And then each group prepares 5 questions with the corresponding mark scheme. And then that encourages the students to think about the problem in the reverse way. So usually when you give students just an activity to do in class, you're only interested in getting the answers for that. But when you give them the opportunity to prepare questions, you are developing a certain aspect of their brain, which is able to relate the concepts that they know into how they can be applied to practical problems. Okay, so once the students prepare, for example, those questions, then you can have them swap among the different groups that are there. So they give a particular question to this group, and this group gives this particular question to that group, but the mark schemes are not to be given out. Then the groups can answer the different questions as groups or as individuals. And when they are done, they have to give again another group to mark that work. When that group finishes marking, the first group, for example, that prepared the questions must give the mark scheme to the group that is marking. And then when those mark, then they can send back to the first group again for moderation. So you have sort of the same scenario that we have in an exam setup. Now, the processes might look very simple, but what you are doing is you are encouraging students to be thinking logically, to be thinking critically, to be thinking about how a problem can surface up by creating the problem themselves, an artificial problem themselves, then also creating a solution to that problem, as well as when the students are marking other students' work, they might be able to read the mind of others. So it's like you're having somebody teaching you something. So there's a lot of ideas that are going around class setup, and you find that even those students that were relatively of low ability, you find that suddenly they begin to pick up, because there is a lot of active learning that is going on in a classroom setup. Of course, this may not happen like throughout in every lesson, but once in a while, maybe at the end of a unit or a chapter, you may want to employ something like this, and you will see just how effective it is actually. And then when you come to answering the practical questions, again, you've prepared the question. How do students go about answering the practical question? So again, the first thing that is important for students to learn is relating the practical concept that they have been asked in the question to where is it coming from in the syllabus. If they're able to identify that, it will be easy for them to identify even the software that accompanies that. One of the challenges that I experienced in my early days as an ICT teacher, I noticed that sometimes you can give a student a question to do with databases, and you expect them to use, for example, a database package. Then suddenly you find the student opens a CSV file and starts to work on a spreadsheet. And then they are trying by all means to accomplish or solve that question using spreadsheet, but then they are failing, they're getting stuck at some point. So it's important that students are able to identify that this particular topic that they're being asked for is coming from this section of the syllabus, and the software that they're supposed to use is actually this software. Then once they identify that, then they can go into, for example, things like having like a checklist. Let's say you are working through databases, so they can produce a checklist, have something like a mind map maybe, or a top-down design of how a database structure can be produced, from just importing tables to all the way down to creating reports. So you can have a structure drawn where you tell the students import file, set up data dictionary, maybe set up data types. From there, create maybe a form, or create a query, use a query to create a report, or use a query to create a label, and so on and so forth. So you'll find all this is going to be very helpful. For some of you who've watched my videos when I'm working through past papers, I like to encourage this approach. Whenever students are given a set of questions, I like to encourage them to break down those questions into the different parts or groupings that will make it easy for them to work. Like, this is importing the database, like I said. This part means you are supposed to create a query. This part means you're supposed to create a report. This part means you're supposed to do this, or this part means you're supposed to do that. That creates a pattern in their head, which makes it easy for them to recognize the concepts that are required for them to solve the different practical questions that they are being asked of. Then the other thing that I'll talk about is printing student work. Again, this can be, you agree with me that it can be a pain if it is not well implemented. I have been before in the past years, maybe around 2014, somewhere there, where I noticed a student was able to print over 100 pages, because they did not answer the practical question very well. So the queries were not working, and ultimately the student was able to print more than 100 pages of work. Now, it's very important that we guide the learners on how to print work. And one of the things that you can employ is not sending work direct to the printer, but printing to a PDF. I found this to be very, very helpful, in that students will be able to see their actual work before it is sent to the printer. They'll be able to see how many pages were able to come. They'll be able to see if they're satisfied with the work that they have printed before they can actually submit it. So it's a very important concept and attitude that you can employ in class by using a PDF editor. Most computers, if you're working, for example, with a Windows machine, you might find it has got an inbuilt PDF converter. So you just say print to Microsoft PDF. I'm not so sure about MacBooks and stuff like that, but for Windows machines, you can have that facility. So you can print to a PDF editor, and that will work out very well. So after you've printed the student work, it's important that we also know how to submit the work. Now, this is very easy if students, you are in the same class with students, but during this period, this has been really difficult for certain schools which have had to have students working, some students working in schools, some students working from home, and in some cases, some don't have power and so on. So it's very important we devise mechanisms for students to be able to submit their assignments so that we can track their progress that they are making during this pandemic, submitting their homework or their classwork. Some schools have employed the use of management information systems. Students are logged into those systems and they can upload their work, and teachers can upload the assignments and so on. So there's back and forth sharing of information using those platforms. There are other platforms, of course, like cloud storage that can be used, but it's important that we clearly define a mean in which students can be able to communicate or send their work, and then also for us to be able to mark that work and send it back to the students for feedback. So talking about feedback here, it's important also to be able to mark student work. I think I cannot overemphasize the importance of teachers marking the practical work or just any other work, but basically feedback is something that students are looking for. There's two sides to this one. There's teacher marking, there's peer marking. Now, in most cases, teachers are used to marking the work for the students, but we can also use the concept of having the students themselves marking the work. But before I talk about having the student marking the work, let me just maybe pass a comment on teacher marking. The manner in which we mark the work can help the student progress or actually hinder their progress. For example, if we're used to marking just by show of ticks, red pen tick when they have gotten something correct, and mark XXX when they have gotten something wrong, that doesn't give the student feedback as to what is wrong or how they can further improve. It's very important that either we adopt an attitude of writing comments, guiding the student exactly where we feel they are wrong and what else they can do to further improve. Okay, so it's very, very important that we adopt this feature. Okay, the other thing that you can do is you can use color codes. I've seen in some schools and some places, I do use that as well at times, where I just, when I feel a student has written something which is very, very good, I can give them maybe a green. If I feel they have written something that is partially correct, but they are on the right track, I can give them something like orange. But if they have written something that is incorrect, then I can give them something like red to tell them this is not correct. But again, what's important is for us to avoid as much as possible feedback that doesn't really help the students, okay? A good example is when a student who is a low achiever always getting X, 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 and as a teacher, you're proud to just write cross, 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 or cancel, cancel, cancel. You are not encouraging or building that student. Eventually, they'll be depressed. They'll think they're not making effort as much as others, or they're doing enough, but it's not just good enough. And they will be shut down in lessons. They will really shut down in lessons, and they will not get anything that you are in. Even if you call them and talk to them, that's not proper feedback. as far as the work is concerned. But you can start to engage the student right on their very paper. You can guide them on the paper as to what information you're expecting and put them on the correct path. And you will see that they will really think that you were part of their learning as a teacher. And then when it comes to peer marking, again, there has been studies that have been made actually about the importance of peer marking, having the students mark their work very well. It's actually reported that students learn very well and respond very well to feedback that is coming from their friends than that is coming from a teacher. So it's not always the case that as a teacher you have to, make feedback about student work. Sometimes just have sessions where students actually mark each other's work. That way, it will help them recognize the pattern of thinking from their friends, the ideas also that their friends are putting across, and how to approach a particular problem. Let's say they all worked the same problem, came up with different solutions. As they mark other student work, they relate their own work, what they wrote, with what the other students has written, and they learn one or two things from there. So peer marking is a very important way of communicating informative feedback to our students. The last thing maybe that I'll talk about is the use of the examiner report. I think this is one of the documents that is rarely used by teachers in schools or in classes, but it's a very, very important document to incorporate, especially when you're doing revision of past papers, because every single session, exam session that we have, Cambridge does produce examiner report, which goes alongside the different papers, explaining on every single question that was the students were examined on, explaining what information the student was required to give, things like how many people in the world managed to get that question, not necessarily in terms of numbers, but just generally, like, did people find that question or students find that question difficulty? Did students find this question easy and stuff like that? So it's a very important document that you can adopt. You can find it, I think, on the teacher support hub or school support hub there. So this document, you can use it alongside the different or respective past paper questions. Like, let's say it's a 2015 paper, you can get the examiner report for that paper, have students go through, write the paper, find the solution, mark and then use the document at the end, to highlight certain important concepts that students should have had known, prior to writing that. You can also use it to emphasize certain topics. Like what I do in my classes, for example, if I'm teaching, let's say on databases, I go on I use the examiner report to find, things that examiners were finding as weaknesses from students. And I try as much as possible to incorporate those in my lesson so that, students are aware that this could be, something that they can easily overlook, but to the examiners, that means a lot. All right, I think I'll end here. Thank you so much for your time, for listening. And Jasmine, I'll be able to hand over to you in case there are any questions and answers to be made.
Hello, Evans. We have lots of questions coming through. That was great. Thank you so much for such an interesting session. So we've had a lot of questions coming through on the chat. I'm just going to spotlight me and you so that everybody can see us as we go through these questions. Okay, there we go. So we've had a lot of questions come through about the software. So I'm just going to run through some of them because we do have quite a lot of these. So how about substitutes like Google Docs, Google Sheets to replace MS Word and MS Excel?
Correct. Thank you. So it's important that we know that the syllabus requires that there's no use of internet. So, or software that will be able to work offline, can be used. But if you're using software that will need internet, it's not allowed for an exam session to have internet available or students to access internet.
Okay, another software-based question. I've got so many here. How easy is it for children to use LibreOffice for Presidents, especially database? Can all tasks be completed, or are there any limitations?
Yeah, I think the people who are using MacBooks, they have said that there are some limitations for that package. I've not personally used it, but it's good as teachers also to pick up a past paper question and try to work through and see if there will be actual limitations that will be explained. But I've heard from some students that there are actually some limitations.
Great to know that going into the academic year. So we have another question. During the pandemic, we had the situation where students are having to learn online. Can you suggest the best approach to guide the students on the practical lesson, as they often have limitations on software and hardware?
Yeah. So when students are, for example, at home or working from home, of course, some students will find it difficult because they want to join the classes using mobile application or mobile devices, and there are limitations to what software can run on those mobile devices. So apparently, the closest maybe that we can get is a tablet for them, or have them use tablets which can install or have certain software installed on them. It's very difficult really to say if somebody's using a phone that they can, for example, do databases from a phone. Yeah, it's really very difficult if they cannot have a proper device to use them.
Okay, that's really great to know, because I'm sure that's something that a lot of people have experienced this past year.
Yeah.
So there's so many questions, it's difficult to pick. So we have quite a lot of questions in the chat, in the Q&A box, about Dreamweaver, lots about using Dreamweaver instead of HTML for web authoring, lots about Dreamweaver 3.0, Dreamweaver 2019. It seems to be a topic that a lot of people have questions about. Is there anything you're able to sort of explain about Dreamweaver and how this might work given the recent updates?
Okay, yeah, so Dreamweaver uses HTML5. The syllabus expects us to work with HTML5 because there is the aspect where students must learn how to embed videos and audios into their HTML pages. So you need to be looking at software which supports the recent versions of HTML, which is HTML5. So I may not mention specific software, but again, I've mentioned these in the video on my YouTube channel. So you can look at that. You will see a list of the software that I've listed, which may support HTML5 and the like. So the lower versions like HTML3, HTML4, they may do certain aspects of the questions, but when it comes to other aspects like video editing, then they will stumble on that.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying that. It seems to be something that a lot of people have a bit of confusion over. Okay. There's so many questions here. Any advice on how to motivate students?
Well, the first motivation is yourself. When you get into the classroom, I think students can pick your attitude. If you're coming with a bad day, if you're coming with a face which is low, students shut down easily. But if you're jovial, you are smiling, students engage very well like that. That's a very good starting point, connecting with the students. I've had situations where I've had some students who've been like getting F grades, and once you start to teach these students and then creating that good friendship with them, helping them, creating time for them. Maybe when they are walking out, call them, maybe say one or two words to them. I believe in you. You can do this. You can make it. That makes them feel comfortable. Or you can tell them, if it's a boarding school, for example, you can say, after school, come to the computer room. I've got some questions for you. That way, they feel you are part and parcel of their learning, and eventually you'll see that their grades will begin to improve. Also, another thing that you can use is giving them targeted work. We should move away from the concept of giving students general work. Like, we should be thinking about the individual student. What is the need for this particular student? and begin to give them targeted work. Give them deadlines, for example. By this time, study this chapter. I'm going to give you these questions. By this time, do this and do that. You can develop what I call the monitor card. It's a simple card that I've, just that I don't have it nearby here, but it's a simple card that I use where I write the student that I want to put on a monitor card. I give them the topics that I tell them, these are the topics that you're going to study for the week. And at the end of the week, you're supposed to report back to me about what you studied. So you use the different color codes. If you understood what you studied, you shade everything green. If you did not understand, you shade red. If you understood partially, you shade maybe amber. And at the end of that, you see that the student will give you feedback on how confident they feel about a particular topic. And I noticed that when I introduced this, it was not only something that the students themselves loved, it was something also that the parents loved. They would even call, this weekend, my child did have a monitor card, you know, and say, oh, I'll put them on monitor card the coming week. So it's something that can easily motivate them because they feel part and parcel of the learning that's taking place.
That's a really great answer. And it's lovely to see how excited you got to talk about motivating your students. It's something that I'm sure a lot of people have struggled with over this past year. And I think we can all agree you do need to get quite creative, especially if you're teaching remotely. We have quite a lot of queries about web expressions for paper 3. It looks as though there's been some updates, and we have a lot of questions asking sort of, can we use Microsoft Web Expression for paper 3, and sort of suggestions like that.
Okay, so if you remember very well, I talked about the support that the software receives from the developers. Web Expression is made by Microsoft, and Microsoft has since discontinued supporting that software. So there are other software that developers do not release updates for. So the last version for Web Expression was 2004. So you can imagine how outdated it may be. It will be able to perform a number of things, of course, a number of things. But if you encounter something that has to do with video editing, then it's going to be a challenge to embed videos or write code which embeds videos using a Web Expression.
Okay, we seem to have a lot of similar questions around any software to replace Photoshop. It looks as though we've got quite a lot of teachers not sure what software is best to use this year. And I know you have got that video on your YouTube channel where you talk in detail about quite a lot of software types.
Yeah, that's true. Well, the main thing around Photoshop, or the main thing around the photo editor that you should be looking at is color depth. I think I've used a different software myself for editing photos or images. One of the things that I've seen, which is a limitation in a number of them, is the ability to change the color depth of an image. And so far, I've seen this facility in Photoshop. So when you're looking out for a particular software, can you check that it is able to change the color depth, because it is a requirement in the syllabus.
Okay, still lots more questions coming through. Everybody's so engaged. It's great to see so many coming through from everybody. Thank you for this. Do you have any tips for students to learn the theory units for low ability learners, because they seem to be good at visual learners?
You're talking about theory or something?
Yes. Do you have any tips for theory units? So I know in the practical skills workbook, we have a 3-tiered approach to all of our activities. Is there anything else you could recommend to help with that differentiation in the classroom?
Yeah. Well, for theory chapters, again, it's very important that you bring life to the theory chapters. Some of them can be a little bit boring for the students. So how you communicate, how you bring up the topic or introduce the topic to the students can really have them engaged so you can look at different activities. For example, engaging activities like puzzles to master concepts like keywords and stuff like that. You can use quizzes, for example, like I do sometimes this in my class, where before they get into class, they have to answer a particular question. So I'll tell them, tomorrow we'll be learning about this chapter or this topic, and then you have to study ahead or prior to coming to class. So you're using something like a flipped class. So you give them some sort of topic that you're supposed to be covering or introducing ahead of time. When they come, then you can have these engaging conversations with them about the topic that you initially gave them. So the idea with theory is to get them interested in the subject, right from the onset. Yeah.
Brilliant. Just time for one or two more questions here. Due to circumstances that we're still in lockdown due to the coronavirus pandemic and conduct distance learning, what is the best way to conduct practicals during distance learning? Or what's your favorite way? Obviously, you're a teacher first and foremost.
Okay, I'll give my example from my classes. So I've had ICT classes and computer science classes, and some of the sessions have been done online. It's important that because you cannot monitor what the students are doing, and I think that's the most difficult or challenging part, because it's difficult to monitor whether a student is on their computer working, other than just asking them to share a screen, and they can easily close up applications that they are not, but it's important to set very high expectations and standards in class. Students should know that you require work to be done or completed within a fixed period of time, so that they're not wasting their times on the computer. So when you set all those things right, from the beginning, you can tell a student, give them a particular question and tell them that you're supposed to give me or send me the answers. Usually what I would do is I can get a past paper question and I can give them, for example, I said, by tomorrow when you come back for class, I want this to have been completed, or send me the solutions or upload. Like we have a shared place on our management information system where they can, each of them, upload their work. So I don't mind what time they complete their work, especially if it's after school, but if it is something that is going to, it should be something that they should do eventually. But in terms of running the actual lessons in a class setup, I can be on my end here. I can share my screen with my students. I can show them maybe how to work around a particular concept. And then I can ask maybe somebody to show everyone how they can approach a particular concept. So if they're all connected to the class setup, you can take advantage of the share facility on these most video conferencing applications, and you can really learn from one another, even in distant places.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the presentation and for answering so many questions on the spot in this Q&A, Evans. It's been a really interesting session. It's really great to hear all of this, and it's lovely to see how passionate you are about teaching and how many questions we've had come through from all of our teachers online. Everybody's so engaged and so enthusiastic about teaching this new syllabus. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today, but thank you all so much for joining us, and a special thank you to Evans for joining us today and taking a bit of your time to talk through the new syllabus and the practical skills with us.
Thank you.
So
thank you.
This video will be available online shortly, and you will all be emailed out with a link to this later this week. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a lovely day.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.